Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Matthew Ogden, and I'd like to welcome you to another discussion between Mr. Lyndon LaRouche and our national candidate slate. We're currently engaged, our entire national organization, in a massive mobilization. I'd like to just start the show by pointing out that we've got a new leaflet on the website, which is available for mass distribution, which is going out everywhere across the country right now. It's called Obama's Thermonuclear Holocaust, President Clinton's Terrible Mistake. And I think that might be a subject which you'd like to initiate the discussion on.
Well, one of the problems here in doing what we're doing is that time does not stop with session to session. In between the sessions we have, things happen. And these things may lead to significant changes in the terrain, in various senses of terrain. And such is the case today. We are now entered into the very big leagues, essentially, in the campaign this year. Because now that Clinton has made the elegant mistake of supporting Obama, he has eliminated himself and the current leadership of the Democratic Party from any significantly positive role in the coming election campaign from this point onward. The obvious intent is to change that and to convert him back to becoming a fighting representative of the Democratic Party. Because the situation, just to review, is the following. We have four clowns as now presented as potentially significant candidates for the Republican nomination. This does not preclude the possibility of a sleeper where the contentions among the candidates, present Republican candidates, may be used in order to bring in a dark horse who to replace them. And obviously the Republican Party is going to play this thing according to the way in which Bill Clinton and others behave. If Bill does one thing, they will do one thing in response. If he does another thing, they will do a different thing in response. So you cannot precisely predict what's going to happen because this is a moving action and people will be shifting as on a football field, as players on a football field do change, at least if they want to win. So we're in that kind of situation. Now, the question is, what about the United States? If Bill continues to follow this policy of Obama, the Democratic Party is finished. Because as we get already, and the Democratic Party should be getting the message already, the majority of the population doesn't want either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. In a default race, with Obama running as president, the chances of the Republican Party taking over are quite possible. So if Obama didn't want the Democratic Party to lose, he made the biggest mistake of his life. Because the one thing he did by supporting Obama, he gives the public the only option of protection from Obama of going Republican. And right now, you know what Republican means. It's not very good. We've got some good Republicans out there, but they're not running for president at this time. And actually, the potential of the Republican Party is poorer than that of the Democratic constituency. That is, the Democratic constituency is a more solid, more agreeable, mutually agreeable party partisanship than you find on the Republican Party today. The Republicans are behaving like absolute loons. And you know what a loon sounds like on a winter night in northern Canada. Yes. And that's where they are. So we're in a completely new situation. And the matter lies in our hands. See, in this game, contrary to generally accepted nonsense, it is not numbers per se that determine the outcome of an election. Most people running in an election or supporting an election are really not very much committed to any real understanding of either the issues, real issues, or how the thing is going to be played. So actually, in all cases, it's a very small part of the population which actually tends to determine the direction of a presidential or similar national election campaign. So the fact that we are few in number is the fact that we outnumber them in brains. That's our advantage. And because I can tell you that's the evidence we have clearly from the behavior of the sundry kinds of candidates we're up against in both parties right now. And in point of fact, neither of these parties have any solution for anything. The Democratic Party is running scared. Clinton is running scared in terms of his role. And people are running scared, and these kinds of conditions are not good people for war. And we're in war. The intention is, just to review, the intention of the British is to pose the possibility of their prompting the launch of a thermonuclear assault, which will cover China, Russia, India, and other places. If, however, the British actually launch such an assault, on the moment of the indication of the assault, Russia, China, and others will launch a counter-assault, which means they will go against, one thing is to go against weapons, the other thing is to go against targets. In other words, in thermonuclear warfare, you've got two targets you're looking at. One is a targeting of a weapon, or essentially a weapon as the primary target. The other is the targeting of people or locations. And if you're going to fight a thermonuclear war, if you're going to take a light shot, that is a warning shot, as you're launching a warfare, you're dead. Because you therefore go with a full shot which is intended to destroy the entire target. That is the entire political human target. And so therefore at that point, the party that has the ability to shoot back with thermonuclear shots will aim for the maximum damage against the most hated enemy. And that will be, of course, the United States, among others, because of Obama. The British usually try to duck on these things. The United States is labeled as the major target. And that's what's happening to us. We are set. The United States is now being set up on two assumptions by the British monarchy, or the British Empire, really. You call it the right thing. That is, to threaten the launching by the United States, by the United States submarine fleet in particular, of a thermonuclear assault against Russia, China, and other nations. Russia will have a slightly different reply, and China too, if that were to be signaled as happening. That's where we are now. And from there on in, it's all the way down, either way. Either the total extinction of the human species as a result of this operation or otherwise. And therefore, the representative of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dempsey, must be treated very seriously. He may not be saying all the things he could say, and I think many of the things he would think about saying would be precisely what I am saying right now. Therefore, it's my duty to say these things right now so that our generals and others don't have to say these things, and that Russia doesn't have to say these things. I'm giving the audience here a full panoply of what the shots are. Now, the British do not want to have a thermonuclear blast on the whole planet. They want something more modest. They want the capitulation of every possible opponent of their tyranny to submit to conditions, to regime change, which would mean the planet would then go under the dictatorship, a dictatorship which would, in fact, as the British have declared, reduce the human population of this planet rapidly from 7 billion people to less than 1. So you don't have a chance. Either you and others defeat the British and defeat Obama as a British agent, or you will probably be dead much earlier than Christmas this year. That's the fact. So the British intention is to threaten, on their behalf and that of the United States in particular, a full thermonuclear blast against the targets, including Russia, China, and others. If Russia and China do not capitulate to regime change, then the war is on. And if the war is on, there's not going to be many people left to observe the result. Therefore, anyone in the United States who does not recognize this fact It does not throw Obama out of office, because that's the only thing that will really stop it. If Obama is thrown out of office, under Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, we are free. If we do not get Obama thrown out of office under Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, we are not free. We're dead. And if we don't do what that implies, we're dead. And that's the situation here. So therefore, we are on top. Not because we have the forces. We're on top because we're right. Either we submit, the world submits to the British demand in the name of Obama to destroy the planet, essentially, and reduce the human population to less than 1 billion people in rapid order, or you get thermonuclear extermination anyway. And there's some countries like China and Russia which will not submit. So therefore, as of now, the threat of a thermonuclear extermination of much of the population of this planet is on the game. And the only way you can get out of it is pulling back Obama. That's where Bill has pulled the most stupid act of his whole life. Because without getting Obama out of office, there's no chance, no reasonable chance, but the world will not go into a thermonuclear extermination phase. Now, this is a new consideration for us as the candidates here assembled, because it's precisely not only that you have to know this, and you have to whisper these facts to friends, but you have to say them loudly on the street. Therefore, this is a time when the idea, rather than the loudness or diversity of the voices, is crucial. Because if people don't listen to what I'm saying now, they're all as good as dead. That's a pretty strong political argument, isn't it? Well, have some fun.
I mean, one thing on this Bill Clinton question and the importance of it, I was very struck because I and one of my fellow organizers did a door-to-door tour down Main Street in Hackensack, New Jersey. And first of all, it was somewhat surprising because the diversity of this population was amazing. I mean, probably we went into shops where a total of maybe 15 different languages were spoken. But people were American citizens and they were business owners. Only maybe 1 out of 6 of them was even registered to vote. We met a young woman who was about 30 who said, the last time I voted was for Bill Clinton. And then she had moved and never bothered to register again. And I was just thinking about what you said about this minority moving things, which we clearly are, but also the weight that Clinton carries, so that you really see this incredible pessimism and apathy, because once he's supporting Obama, then people's sense is there is nothing. So they do nothing. And that's how you would get this catastrophic result.
That's what has happened is Bill and the whole crowd with him are in the process of taking themselves off the table for this election. And they're leaving it up to the chaos factors. And the Republicans are no solution for this problem, even though they're not Obama. Because the British influence on the Republican side is probably a bit stronger than the Democratic side. So the fact is, what we're dealing with an issue where our approach, our policy at least, will determine whether or not there's going to be human life on this planet, or probably the United States itself. That's what the situation is. And therefore, the number of votes that you can count at this point is rather irrelevant. If you really look deeply at what the potential vote is, and this kind of message going out, people are just going to go wild, quietly, desperately wild. And they may do something crazy in terms of voting patterns and so forth. The only way we can, given the fact there are no Republicans worth anything out there to be the alternative, the Republicans are not an alternative in terms of these 4 candidates. Maybe they will come up with something which will pretend to be the 5th choice. Mm-hmm. I would expect at this point that's very much on the mind of the Republican bosses. But at this point, the Democratic Party is a non-starter for the survival of the human race. And that's a very bad message to have to deliver to the citizens out there. But that means that may find them hopeless. It's only when we can organize to get Obama thrown out of office, then and only then can the U.S. population have any control over its own destiny. And anyone who's not voting that way, and not thinking that way, has no right to expect any destiny at all, and probably won't have one.
I think it's really important to get a sense of how deeply this demoralization factor is permeating through all layers of the population, especially in the scientific community. I know I attended a conference here in Houston this weekend, a space conference, and the lady in charge of it wrote me back and saying that I was not permitted there anymore, that people felt uncomfortable about what I was saying and what the members with me were saying, because we put the reality on the table. The war avoidance policy has to be a mission for space, and Obama has to go and continue to hit with that. And so she said, that's not going to happen. People were uncomfortable about you talking about impeachment, and we should just talk about the happy things of space. But the demoralization was that they don't believe that they can win. And we were showing them that our only chance of winning is to immediately demand Obama's removal and to demand an end to this threat of thermonuclear World War III. And so you see how this demoralization factor creates fear throughout the population, and how it's important to see on not only the Democratic Party, but what Bill Clinton is doing and the layers in the Democratic Party capitulating to Obama, the conditions that they're creating.
That's it. That's exactly it. And therefore, that's our job. And our job is not to try to bargain with people, but to present them with the truth and make it hard. And what you really have to do, don't be a humble person. You mustn't be a humble person. You must say, look, there are a few of us. We're prepared to save this nation. Do you, by any chance, care what happens to this nation? And that's the only way you can go at it. Because, again, numbers don't count. What counts in this is ideas. It's not that ideas per se can win. It's conceptions, if communicated to people, they can win. And the people who can communicate those kinds of ideas that are needed are automatically the leaders. And it's through leadership of that type, defined in that way, that all the greatest achievements of humanity in statecraft have ever been achieved. And to say that we are not competent to save ourselves is what this woman said to you. She's not competent to try to save her own damn life? What kind of a poor woman is it that? And she does, maybe because she hasn't got a spaceship. Maybe that's what makes her cowardly. Maybe if she had a spaceship, she would feel more free to express her opinions and to listen to opinions. And so we have to react not by fear of public opinion, because you're going to find that out there you will find a cadre, maybe 1 out of 20, who has guts. And it's the mobilization of that 1 out of 20, if it exists, of which you're working toward. You're saying, we are going to conspire to save this nation. We are not going to allow this to happen to this nation. Well, we might be killed in the process, but if we don't do it, we're going to be killed anyway, so what are you worried about? And that's the only way you can handle a thing like this. And at the same time, inspire them with what can be done, and the pleasure and joy of what can be done instead.
Well, I think that's one of the basis of the capitulation of what we're seeing with Bill Clinton is, and others that are in this circle who, if they were to lock in and actually go there in terms of what the implications of this thermonuclear confrontation with Russia and China actually means, and the brutality of that, that when you get down to it, as you just had mentioned, that you're dealing with a situation where if Russia and China capitulate to the British system, it's going to be the same result anyway in terms of a mass extermination of mankind. It may not be as quick as a thermonuclear showdown, but if people can get it into their mind's eye that neither of these are options, the capitulation or this war, then that steals the resolve to actually fight this thing now. And I know that, running into some people in the streets, I had a run-in with an official with the Democratic Party who, I said, look, let's throw this guy out now. We can get a new candidate coming in for the Democratic Party that will shift the whole discussion in this insane Republican Party discussion. And, she said, well, I voted for Hillary. And then went on to say, I think because of just this trying to justify what was going on, that she actually thought that Hillary was behind this whole predator drone operation assassinating world leaders, So I just sort of bring that up because you just get this confusion of what people would want from the leadership of the same element of the Democratic Party, but that's not there. And so we have to take that charge now and just say there's nothing else. By rallying our forces, we can get this sanity faction back into the Democratic Party, but only by sticking to the truth of where we're at with the strategic situation right now.
I can tell you that I'm in the process of completing a paper, which I would hope to have published by tomorrow, which will actually address this question. In other words, the question of how we're going to look at this thing and what the implications are. It's the message essentially that has to be put out on the assumption that maybe 10% of the population will listen to this message. That is in terms of the idea content. That is exactly our best shot right now. That's why I'm doing it. Because we can give them facts which they're not getting from any other source. And intelligent people, and there are probably among about up to 10% of the population, are intelligent people. The others don't lack, shall we say, what we call ordinary intelligence, but they lack political intelligence capability. They lack strategic sense of reality. But if we can get across to a number of people what the situation is, what the alternative is, and you have to pose the alternative, here's the one alternative, here's the opposing alternative, here's the third screwball thing that we may throw into the axis. And that's what we are. So I'm doing this now, in this tonight, and probably by tomorrow morning out sometime tomorrow. And on this thing, there is a very specific kind of approach which we can take as a strategic approach, which has to be laid out. And it's based on the stuff I've already been doing. But also the same thing is extremely important, is what we're doing generally on Wednesday in terms of the science program, the weekly report. This contains the kind of knowledge which will open the minds of a minority of the population to what the reality within this solar system and this neck of the galaxy means. Those conceptions which shift the viewpoint from the defeatist viewpoint of us little people being pushed around to the concept of mankind as a very powerful force in terms of this galaxy. Maybe at one look at the galaxy, but in principle, we're a powerful force that can provide security within the solar system and can actually begin to bring some improvements, if necessary, into the fringes of the galaxy. Therefore, mankind is a powerful force. I mean, take the case of example of the E equals mc squared, this concept. This is the actual, direct and actual level of scientific activity on which everything depends today. What we're dealing with that is forces in which very small forces, when fully developed, as Einstein provided, you have powers that will astonish the stars. There's powers that already exist in the stars, and therefore the stars are smart enough to be astonished.
Yeah, I think that the question that's been coming up on these Wednesday discussions, and I look forward to what you put in this paper, but the question of matter, antimatter, just in looking into this, you're dealing with 100% matter to energy conversion. And I mean, some people say 200%, but you're talking about a future for mankind where you're not dependent on anything other than mankind's creative capability to overcome the problems that mankind's facing. And frankly, just the fact that we have 6 candidates talking about that is an interesting phenomenon. But what Matt just pointed out recently is that we have a growing number of candidates in general who, recognizing that something has to be done, are beginning to begin running on Glass-Steagall. They're beginning to run on Hamiltonian banking. We have a candidate down in Southern California who's talking about Hamiltonian banking. But there is a part of this 10% of the population you're talking about. And I think that it is quite a beautiful thing to get that concept across to people, that you're sitting here squabbling over very small things, but matter, antimatter is not only something, and it's not only something that is in the future, but it's something that we already can harness today if we had the plan to do it. And I think one of the papers that the basement was looking at was by a scientist, and his interpretation of what we can do with matter, antimatter is that if we had the will to do it in 40 years, we could have interstellar space travel starting.
Yeah, and we're likely in a fairly short time, we have 1 week to Mars possibilities. So therefore, this is our real weapon. But what we have to do also is recognize, because of this, we've got to be cautious about the social approach to politics, the social-only approach to politics. What we are facing now, when you're looking at a step below matter, antimatter, and when you're looking at thermonuclear power, which is one step, but it's a big, giant step thereafter. At this point, these are the politics of the solar system. These are therefore the politics of the fate of mankind within the solar system. This is the area in which our attention in the basement is concentrated, even though we deal with other matters. Therefore, is this not the matter which should really be the basis for defining the policy of the United States and other nations on Earth? So therefore, why are we wasting our time babbling about this and that on street corners when we realize the destiny of mankind is located in this magnitude and profundity of issues? Why are people not looking at the future? If you're looking at the past, when the past is doomed, what's your state of mind? If you're looking at the future and what the future can offer for mankind, then your attitude has changed completely. And it's the fact that we're still on street corners trying to talk to basics, get down to the nitty-gritty. That kind of conversation depresses and demoralizes a population faced with a problem like this. The problem is beyond their ideas. They can't even imagine what a thermonuclear confrontation is among nations. They can hear about it, but they have no idea what the hell it is. And if we're talking to them in those terms and trying to explain away the issue of thermonuclear destruction when they don't even understand what it is, how the hell are you going to give them a rational view of what the problem is we actually face? Therefore, what we are doing on these Wednesday programs on the basement must be extended as well as more heavily emphasized in our whole program, and get away more from the social process as such, as directly. Don't try to substitute social process for science. What you have to do is get to the social implications of the powers expressed as science, because that's the only place in which the real issues proposed to us by this threat of war will be resolved. So mankind has got to get rid of a green and go to great power. And mankind has in mankind's hands access to immediate great power beyond the imagination of virtually any citizen out there today. Let's say, for example, let's take a case of our Detroit area and look at the composition of the labor force in the Detroit area. What's their potential? Now, admittedly, most of them have lost a lot since the automobile industry was shot down and so forth. But there's still a hard core of that, and there's a memory of it among older people who once had some experience with high-tech production and what can be done. In building, they may not know what thermonuclear fusion does, but they know what the instruments are that we have to use in order to build the apparatus we need for thermonuclear fusion type operations and applications. Therefore, we must appeal to the people, to something in them which is not pitiful or pitiable hopelessness. Most people out there are denied technology. There practically is no technology left for ordinary production in the United States left. GE is no longer a manufacturing firm. It's a speculating firm. So therefore, we have destroyed the American people of the sense of what their power was. The power was a leading nation of this type. If you don't give them an expression of the weapon which they know how to use, at least instinctively because of their history, the history of this country, for 3 and 4 generations and more. Therefore, our impetus is we avoid scientific issues in our political organizing. We're falling into the enemy's trap. And therefore, we are the experts. We are the people who are concerned about the instrumentation of thermonuclear fusion and beyond. We're the people who are going to Mars. We're the people who are going to change these things. And we're going to employ people here on Earth for the kind of jobs they would like to have and for the future they would like to have in building these kinds of systems which will make a difference for the human race. Our trying to respond to poor Bill Clinton, who doesn't conceive of these things, and others who don't conceive of these things, is our failure to do that. What we're trying to do with the Wednesday meetings, every Wednesday on the science question, this is where our emphasis must be. Get off this chatter about social theory. Because what mankind needs are the instruments by which we can save the human species. And that is not social theory.
Yeah, and I think ironically enough, that is the way to produce real political leadership too. Because what most people have no idea of is that the real political battlefield is a political battlefield of the human mind. And that comes up in all sorts of ways in which people think about issues, or they tend to see Obama's motivations in particular as something coming from something less than what it actually is, which is the British Empire. Not something he's necessarily fully conscious of, but that it is on this domain of an intention to stop the development of mankind. And when you bring a discussion forward on matter, antimatter, and just how things that do not seem at all to be the domain of man suddenly become so because of the capability of what the human mind can bring about in the future, all of a sudden it becomes very clear that what the talking points are, what most people believe politics are about, is just not at all the case.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
It's what you were talking about the other day, too, about establishing an independent sense of political truth, independent of popular opinion.
Yeah.
And, something to get people's minds, like the 10%, as you said, outside of the circumstantial just conditions that have created the discussion of what's there. You completely break out of that and say, I have an independent sense of what truth is, and that's the political power.
We have closed off people's minds increasingly. The way this has worked is we used to have a commitment for medicine. So people had a response to improvements and advancements in medicine for care. We had also the concept of the establishing of the instruments as such for delivering this care. So in that way, science, which is the progress of the human mind, was relevant to the full panoply of human existence, except for poor people in strange places. They've taken that away. We now say all that stuff is gone. You have a president who lies and says there's nothing we can do about tornadoes. There's nothing we can do about this. We can't forecast this. He's a liar. The man's a stinking, stupid liar. And all the people who support him are liars because they're accomplices and a fraud against the American people. So by taking away science and technology, in particular, away from the American people as an integral part of daily life, not just experience of daily life, but development one's own experience of life to a higher level. From the immigration from Europe, especially that occurred during the Civil War, you had a great impetus of people moving in from Europe to the United States. The basis of the Lincoln impetus was powerful production, means of production, great growth, the railway system, everything, wonderful things, in which the people participated. Look at the great farm belt that was built, of Germans and others fleeing into the Middle West in order to become farmers here. This was part of the essential growth of the United States. This kind of land of opportunity for progress in life was the United States. This is what has been taken away from us.
Ironically, the man who discovered antimatter, Carl Anderson, was the son of Swedish immigrants who had come over right during the Lincoln period. Yeah. And he was a poor immigrant, first-generation American whose parents had dedicated everything to making sure that he could become a scientist.
And today, what Einstein and others did with this set the foundations for what we now understand today as within access to us. I mean, let's do developments around the Van Allen belts, for example, in there. This antimatter problem there. We are on highly practical matters of importance to people in the streets of the United States. And these matters which they used to have access to in the sense of hoping that they could get a scientific orientation in terms of employment, that's been taken away from them. They therefore have demoralized them systemically, not just by intimidation, but by systemic demoralization. They've given up hope of life, hope that they could achieve something. It's like this woman in there in Houston. The same thing. She's given up the hope that her work will ever come back. Therefore, she's not willing to fight for it. She's not willing to defend it anymore. I guarantee you, 2 years ago, she'd have fought for it. Right. 2 years now later, she's given it up. It's exactly that. And therefore, we have to take on this, what we're doing on the Wednesday meetings. We have to emphasize it in the organization. Don't talk about social theory. Social theory comes from technology in the sense that what the human mind has to become in order to meet the challenge of progress. It's when mankind is connected to the human mind by the challenge of progress that you get great optimism in society. It was always the repressive, a European method of repressiveness, of same old, which caused demoralization repeatedly even in the best nations in Europe. In the United States, when we were our own people, we had the best because whatever it was, we were going to do it. And that's what we need now. So that the Wednesday development on this question of the implications of matter, antimatter, are the most important conception for our attention as an organization at this time. Because it is only that which now has the most effective direct access to the human imagination of what is real that can change the universe for them. And without that, success is not possible.
Well, there's a lot of people who know Franklin's statement that, you have a republic if you can keep it. That comes up oftentimes in the field or different institutions. People have brought that up, given that we are on the verge of losing the republic. But if you look at Franklin on the question of science, the issue of science and statecraft, that was what it was all about. That was the development of the American credit system, was that all this credit was used for was for the development the economy developing from the standpoint of making progress in scientific and technological breakthroughs, giving you the real margins of profit or of growth of the economy. And that really the legacy of Franklin comes out of the tradition of what Leibniz was doing. And so you always look at, every time you have these great scientific minds in history, it's always connected to this statecraft, what Leibniz was doing back in the time, fighting for the concept of the establishment of a republic. So, science is politics. I guess I'll just leave it at that.
You can go further than that. You could go back to Nicholas of Cusa.
Mm-hmm.
You had a dark age, which dominated the preceding century. And then you had this emergence of a new movement in which Jeanne d'Arc was a key figure. Here's this woman from the countryside, dressed in full armor, out there leading troops and winning a war. And then she was tortured to death. She was actually literally cooked to death. And the word got to a council that was being held around Italy, northern Italy, and the council took note of this terrible thing that had been done to her. This became a factor of inspiration, leading into the great ecumenical council of Florence, and leading beyond that into the development of European civilization around Louis XI, who was the great founder of statecraft in Europe, the great successor of what had been anticipated in terms of Charlemagne early. And it's this kind of outlook on humanity, looking more than at one's own generation, looking at 10 generations or more, and seeing the continuity among generations. Look at the United States. The United States was actually created beginning 1620, after they found their way to Massachusetts from Provincetown, where the Portuguese were already fully ensconced in the fishing business, collecting cod, which they would package and ship back to Europe every 2 years. This kind of sort of thing. So, but there was this development of multiple generations in succession and succession, and passing on from children to next generation, that the development of a culture in a population comes from the birth of children and the birth of the next generation, which is the way the United States was developed from 1620 to the present as a single unit of history. What was the difference? They left Europe, which the oligarchical system was still prevalent, where they could not progress. They went to North America. In North America, accomplished what they could not accomplish in Europe. Then, in turn, at various points, the feedback from what was doing in the United States fed back into Europe, stirred up developments in Europe, and then those things, in turn, came back to the United States. So it's this cultural development across successive generations, always based on scientific and cultural progress, but a unity of scientific and cultural progress. And that's the only weapon we have which can address the problem that faces us now. And only to the degree that you can find people, as that we can do at a Wednesday meeting in our reporting here, we can get more and more into the science thing to make science understandable as a sensuous thing to people. Once they understand that science is progress, and without science there is no progress, then the experience of progress is the basis for optimism. It's the basis for culture. Without that factor of culture, you cannot defeat the kind of monster we face now.
And that's the optimism that you see in the Russian people and in the Chinese people. And the process that you described of going from Europe to North America, now the center of gravity is shifting to the Pacific. And Putin said this explicitly a few weeks ago. He said, yes, the Atlantic has been the center of civilization for 500 years, but now it's shifting to Russia, China, and the Asia-Pacific.
It's approximately good thing to say on his part in particular. It's not untrue,
right.
But there are other truths that we have to bring forward, and it's our job. And I don't think that Putin would object at all to our doing our thing, shall we say, in this respect.
Well, I think they're also terrified of the resonance of that optimism in the American people, because even with what we've been through since the Kennedy assassination, the Bobby Kennedy assassination, people are passionately committed to the space program. And you see this, I was speaking at a county commissioners meeting, and it was really, you got a sense of both worlds, because on the one hand, there was a large crowd there because they're shutting down a senior center. They're privatizing it, and they're going to kill off these people. However, the same day, the local high school had an internet dialogue with the astronauts on the space station. So the commissioners were absolutely beaming. I mean, everyone was so excited about this, and they were making jokes saying, my gosh, the communication with these people in outer space was a lot better than on my cell phone. I'm talking to someone locally. And then one man came up and said, I wasn't that interested in the space program, but my cousin was an astronaut who died in training for one of the first missions. And he said, ever since my cousin died, I have been completely obsessed with following what's happening with the space program. And you also get a sense that it's the immortality, which is the optimism, not the particular things that happen on the way.
Well, just think through. What is if you think about immortality in the proper way, that it's the continuity of what human beings contribute from one generation to the next. And it's not a separation of generations. Death is not a separation of generations, it's a connection of them. And when you see things in that manner, we have wonderful opportunities before us. In other words, to say, is there something we can do in our lifetime which is connected to previous generations and will be connected to future generations, so that we are, in a sense, now participating in the future, because we are in the process of contributing to making the future. And therefore we locate our identity in doing that. What you have is people who are cut off from that sense of the relationship of generations to this idea, it's your generation and you die, that's it. Closed case. Right. It's why people are afraid of cremation. Because the sense that they leave a presence behind in the living world means that they feel that death is not the end of their existence. It may be the end of their life, but not the end of their existence in life.
Right.
And that's the difference. And that's the moral difference. And what we're getting is this loss of any sense that people don't desire to have children. Some people don't like the product and therefore say, let's cut this out now before it gets too far. But most people are tied, and we are tied not only to our own children, we're tied to other people's children. And to the extent that we're participating in the development of other people's children, we feel that that in itself is a connection, a kind of immortality. Because what you're doing, the meaning of what you're doing will not die.
Right.
And the only policy in which you can organize a sane and safe society is the dedication, the meaning of your life will not be permitted to die unless you do it yourself, unless you decide to do that. As long as you're committed to humanity and dedicated in your activity to humanity, it's like people are dedicated to their own children, dedicated to their own grandchildren. It's this sense of a dedication to the future, participation in the future, which makes life securely meaningful. That is, the meaning of your life never need cease. Your life may cease, but the meaning of your having lived will never cease. And that is essentially the only morality there is. Otherwise than guesswork, wild guesswork. And therefore, that's what we have to be, the future. And the future is expressed today, typified by science. So the scientific development, which we're emphasizing, especially in these Wednesday sessions, this is the real secret of statecraft today.
And that's what the British Empire absolutely despises. In their drive toward the elimination of billions of people from the planet, anybody who represents that quality of statecraft and commitment to the future progress of mankind and the commitment to the future generations, passing on these ideas from one generation to the next. I mean, you take, for instance, the threat that someone like Putin represents to the empire, and what he's doing right now, and why the attacks of attempted assassination threats are coming out very strongly against him. Not just because he's opposed to this war drive, and he knows that this means an all-out nuclear showdown if Obama's not stopped, but he also understands, to a certain extent, I believe, this very thing that we're talking about, why we need this science driver and why we need sovereign nations committed to the future progress of mankind. And that's exactly what we have to fight to defend the interest of as our political candidacies, our slate of candidates representing that very unique quality.
I'd say one of the, just as an idea, one of the difficulties that we run into, I think, in trying to convey this to the population, is that there's a very difficult understanding that people have of an oligarchical force. They understand that there's a small group of people who have a lot of money who probably intend to kill them and want to do very bad things to them. But the idea that you have a force of people who are behind the world war threat becomes difficult for people for one reason, I think. I think it's the reason of this scientific question, that there is a very clear creative principle in the human individual, and that you've got an oligarchical force that's hell-bent on destroying that creative principle. And if you don't know what that creative principle is, then it would be very difficult for you to understand some entity that's trying to destroy that creative principle. And I think that the concept of getting a creative idea across the mass population, maybe this is 10% that you were bringing up earlier, but that is really a mission that we've got to push for, is to get people to understand what it means to have a creative thought. And it seems to me that the more we get into matter, antimatter as a concept, you're dealing with things that you'll never ever see, ever. But you're using that to go to places that we've never seen before at speeds that you couldn't possibly begin to understand how your senses, but you couldn't use your senses to understand what was going on at all. And when you start to get into that domain, the concept of immortality, the concept of human development, and what that means for future generations and past generations and your participation in that, I think becomes more clarified. And I think one of the biggest problems we've got in conveying these ideas to the American people is getting them to understand that there are many, many things, as a matter of fact, probably everything that matters has nothing to do with their central apparatus. It's outside of that. And our challenge is to drive that to them. And that's real, I think, real politics.
One thing to add on that, I think, because, just going back to the response that I got from this lady at the space conference, I mean, I think it really shows that we have a real responsibility to push the limits, that this idea that there's limits to our human progress. I brought up the call for fusion development, fusion energy for 1G acceleration, and she said I was crazy for saying that. We're not going to get to fusion. Are you crazy? We're not, we barely have fission. You must have been talking about fission. I know you weren't talking about fusion. Like, what kind of whack, crazy stuff is that? With people with that demoralized state, and with us talking about matter, antimatter, I mean, we are completely pushing the boundaries in people's thinking, because you have people who have set these limitations on their own progress, which is going to kill them.
Yeah, the point is that they are failures. They are self-inflicted failures. And they do that to themselves. Matter, antimatter, we're already there. We live in a domain of matter, antimatter. We had a big discussion of this, and some of the new developments pertaining to this recently in our discussion, in the basement discussion. I mean, this is there. You have phenomena on the earth which are based on the same thing. And we can. It's just a matter of the time. I mean, we talk about time of development, of developing a project. We are already at the phase of a quasi-matter antimatter propulsion, which is fusion. And we're looking at, down the line, a full matter-antimatter, or nearly full, propulsion, which would make us able to take a walk to the edge of the solar system. This is presently there. We have phenomena which correspond to this kind of thing. It's all there. And all it means is we're understanding what the processes of development are. We don't block our minds and become completely arbitrarily stupid. We realize, as I can, or others can, that this is there. I first went on this thing about and forecasting the moon landing on moon, which I did to the middle of the 1980s, toward the end of the 1980s, with the woman on the moon.
Nice.
I tried to make it pretty in some senses, but there's nothing I said there which is not within the realm of science. And it was in the realm of science then. Now, for example, I had, in the design of that one program, I had an Italian aeronautic specialist. And if you ever looked at the craft that we were using to get into near space, get out to the edge of space, that craft we designed is exactly the way it has to be done. It never has been done yet. But I was able, as a designer of a proposal, to enlist somebody who's working with me to do a design, an aerodynamics design, on a craft which would cut down the cost, the cause of getting to orbital position, by 90%. So these capabilities existed, and still do exist, if we apply them. And we will not apply them unless we can first think them. And if you're not thinking them, you will never apply them. And you have to say, well, you're traveling lightly today. You're not bringing your brains along.
Yeah, that's certainly an irony and cost efficiency, what you just brought up. Since most people are thinking in monetary terms, but what's the most not cost effective, but what's the most efficient way to get to Mars is a much better question. But just on this question of the fact that the population doesn't understand thermonuclear war is quite provocative. Because at first I was taken aback when you said that, because people are very, very afraid. They are afraid of the candidates. They know they're clowns. So if they're this afraid, and they can also see this discussion around Iran and Syria, wouldn't they understand we're on the verge of thermonuclear war? But you're exactly right, actually, that they really don't, because they can't really conceive of that. So it's just very interesting. But at the same time, they do understand the principle of creativity. And there is resonance when you bring up these principles of, well, the real attack, in the real fight in the world right now is around human creativity. They do resonate with that. So that does show the potential for us to shift the population towards the policy that you're discussing. But that is the right direction, I think, that we can lead people in.
Good. That's what I'd say.
Okay. It's a good discussion. Is there anything more to add? If not, we have a lot of work to do this week. The Russian elections are coming up this weekend, so by the time we meet here again next Monday, we'll be in the aftermath of those. So I think that's a good place to sign off. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you later on this site.
Excellent.